There is a world floating in the darkness, a world unlike any other we have ever found. From a distance, it glows with a soft sapphire light, fragile, delicate, impossibly alive. Astronomers call it Time's Earth asterisk, but to the universe, it is something far more rare, a shimmering anomaly in a sea of silence. No other known planet breathes. No other world sings with water, with wind, with forests and storms and spiraling currents of life. And yet, here, it is suspended in the void, held together by nothing more than gravity and impossibly thin layers of air and ocean. If you could drift just above its surface, you would feel the planet moving beneath you, whispering through shifting tides, rising through mountain peaks, glowing through volcanic heat. You would sense a pulse, the subtle heartbeat of a world shaped over billions of years. But the greatest mystery of all is not the oceans, nor the continents, nor the drifting clouds. It is times how this world became blue times in the first place, how a barren rock turned into a cradle of life, how its oceans were born, how its skies formed, and how against every cosmic odd this planet learned to sustain itself. Tonight, we will sink through its atmosphere, descend into its waters, and listen to the stories hidden within every grain of sand, every molecule of air, every trembling wave that touches its shores. This is not just a planet. It is a living system, a delicate, breathing miracle in the endless dark. Welcome to asterisk, the blue planet, asterisk. For billions of years, Earth has moved in a slow, graceful arc around the sun, held in perfect balance by forces older than the stars themselves. Yet its surface tells a story far more dynamic, a tale of oceans rising and falling, continents drifting like silent rafts, atmospheres forming and dissolving, life emerging from water's embrace and reshaping everything it touched. To understand this world, we must let go of the idea of Earth as a static sphere. It is, instead, a restless organism, an engine of constant transformation. The oceans were the planet's first architects. Born from volcanic steam and icy comet fragments, they cooled the young Earth, absorbing heat, sculpting weather, and dissolving minerals that would one day form the chemistry of life. Within their depths, tectonic forces stirred the crust, creating mountains, trenches, and coastlines that shifted over millions of years. The water, endlessly circling in currents and tides, became the planet's bloodstream, redistributing heat, nutrients, and energy across the globe. Above the oceans, the atmosphere formed a protective veil of gases, thin yet powerful. It filtered sunlight, carried storms, and shielded the surface from the harshness of space. Each breath of air today is part of a cycle billions of years in the making, a cycle shaped by volcanic eruptions, biological activity, and the delicate balance of oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. The sky, ever-changing, acts as the planet's memory, holding traces of ancient climates, extinct ecosystems, and distant eras of warmth and ice. And through this intricate dance, Earth developed something no other known world possesses. Asterisk, stability within motion. Asterisk. Its climate oscillates, yet retains balance. Its crust fractures, yet rebuilds. Its oceans darken, yet generate life. This equilibrium is the foundation upon which all living forms, from the smallest marine bacteria to towering forests, have flourished. To explore Earth is to witness a planet that never sleeps. A planet sculpted by fire, cooled by water, shaped by air, and transformed by life itself. A planet where every wave, every breeze, every grain of soil is part of a story billions of years long. Beneath the shimmering surface of Earth's oceans lies a world so vast, so ancient, that even today we have explored only a fraction of its depths. Yet these waters shape every moment of life above. They regulate temperature, cradle storms, and carry nutrients across thousands of kilometers. In the quiet darkness of the abyss, unseen currents flow with the steadiness of a heartbeat, slow, continuous, essential. This is the planet's circulatory system, a hidden engine that keeps the world alive. Warm waters rise and fall in great loops across the oceans, driven by winds, sunlight, and the rotation of the Earth. These currents, like the Gulf Stream and the Antarctic circumpolar current, transport heat from the equator toward the poles, creating climates stable enough for life to flourish. Without them, continents would freeze and scorch in violent cycles, and the delicate balance that sustains ecosystems would collapse. In this sense, the oceans do not merely exist. They act, responding to changes, distributing energy, maintaining equilibrium. Above this restless water, the atmosphere drifts in constant motion, a transparent ocean of its own. Every cloud, every breeze, every gentle shift of pressure is part of a global conversation, air speaking to water, water speaking to land. The atmosphere's molecules vibrate with memory, traces of ancient volcanoes, whispers of forests long vanished, the faint chemical signatures of eras colder and warmer than our own. It is a living archive, storing the history of this world in patterns of humidity, temperature, and wind. Sunlight triggers the great cycles of evaporation and rainfall, lifting water from the sea, dropping it on distant mountains, returning it through rivers and streams. In this never-ending loop, Earth hydrates itself, cleanses itself, nourishes itself. Even the air we breathe is shaped by this process. Each molecule of oxygen is the result of photosynthetic life, marine algae, forests, and the countless tiny organisms drifting in the open sea. Every breath is, in a sense, a gift from the planet's living surface. Yet beneath all this motion, an even deeper rhythm governs Earth's destiny, the slow tectonic drift of its continents. The ground beneath your feet is not still. It slides, it rises, it fractures, it grows. Over millions of years, massive slabs of rock shift and collide, forming mountain ranges that scrape the sky and oceans that plunge into darkness. Continents merge into supercontinents, only to break apart again in cycles that span hundreds of millions of years. This ceaseless movement shapes climates, alters coastlines, and drives the evolution of every living form. It is a dance so slow, so deliberate, that a single human lifetime cannot perceive its steps, yet its effects define the history of the planet. When continents drift, weather changes. When mountains rise, rainfall patterns shift. When oceans open or close, entire species flourish or disappear. Nothing on Earth is isolated. Everything is connected by invisible systems that pulse together: air, water, stone, life, each influencing the others in delicate balance. Earth is not a passive world. It is dynamic, self-regulating, responsive, a blue symphony of interacting forces, moving as one living whole. In the vast silence of Earth's early oceans, long before forests, animals, or even the faintest whisper of complex life, the planet was already preparing something extraordinary. The seas were warm, mineral-rich, and illuminated by the glow of volcanic vents. Lightning cracked across dense, storm-filled skies. Molecules drifted, collided, separated, and collided again thousands of times each second. What appeared chaotic was, in truth, a careful choreography of chemistry, unfolding in the solitude of a young world. Within this restless ocean, simple compounds, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, began forming increasingly complex structures. Amino acids linked together in spirals and chains. Lipid molecules assembled themselves into tiny spheres, forming primitive membranes. These microscopic bubbles were not alive, but they carried the hint of life, the ability to separate inside from outside, to create a protected space where chemistry could unfold with greater elegance. Here, in these tiny pockets of structure, something remarkable happened. Certain molecules discovered that they could copy themselves, not through intention, not through consciousness, but through the geometry of their shapes and the laws of physics that governed their bonds. Replication was the first whisper of biological memory. A molecule that could make a version of itself became a message passed forward through time. With each imperfect copy, each tiny error, new variations emerged. Some dissolved, others stubbornly persisted, and the ones that endured by chance alone gained greater presence in the ocean's molecular landscape. Little by little, the chemistry of Earth began selecting patterns, choosing, unconsciously, the molecules most suited for survival in a world of heat, pressure, and constant motion. This was evolution before life. Natural selection acting not on organisms, but on molecules. As these molecular replicators grew more complex, they formed partnerships, chains of reactions linked together, creating primitive metabolisms, chemical loops that harvested energy from sunlight, minerals, or the heat of hydrothermal vents. These loops grew tighter, more efficient, more coordinated. And then, in one of the most profound transitions in the history of the planet, these chemical systems became enclosed in membranes. Inside these fragile shells, reactions could unfold in exquisite order. They could build structures, store information, respond to their surroundings, repair themselves. A cell had been born. It was simple, far simpler than anything alive today, but it held the blueprint for every organism that would ever exist. Bacteria, plants, animals, forests, insects, whales, humans, all of them trace their ancestry back to these ancient, invisible architects floating in the primordial sea. As these early cells multiplied, they began to transform the planet itself. Some learned to capture sunlight through photosynthesis, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. At first, this oxygen was a poison to most life. But gradually, it became the foundation of new biochemical possibilities, unlocking energy on a scale that allowed cells to grow larger, more complex, more interconnected. Oxygen changed everything. The oceans rusted. The sky shifted. A new kind of life, one capable of breathing, burning, and moving, emerged from the quiet miracle of chemical evolution. And so Earth, once a silent blue sphere of water and stone, became something else entirely. A living world, guided by the slow intelligence of molecules, shaped by time, and destined to awaken into complexity. Life was no accident. It was the universe learning, for the first time, how to organize itself. As the first cells multiplied across the ancient seas, Earth's oceans slowly shifted from simple chemical landscapes into vibrant, evolving ecosystems. These early organisms, tiny, fragile, unseen, began to experiment with new ways of gathering energy, transforming the chemistry of the planet with every breath they took. Some consumed minerals from volcanic vents, others absorbed dissolved carbon. But a particular lineage discovered something far more powerful: the ability to capture sunlight. Through photosynthesis, these microorganisms use the energy of the sun to split water molecules, storing power in chemical bonds and releasing oxygen as a waste product. At first, this oxygen drifted unnoticed into the oceans, reacting with iron and turning the seafloor rust red over millions of years. But as oxygen continued to accumulate, the chemistry of the entire planet shifted. The oceans changed color, the atmosphere thickened with new gases, and gradually Earth began to transform from a warm, hazy world into a bright blue planet. Oxygen, once toxic to early life, became the most valuable currency of biological energy. It allowed cells to burn fuel efficiently, unlocking far more power than any previous metabolic process. This new source of energy enabled life to grow larger, more complex, and more cooperative. Single cells joined together, forming colonies where tasks could be shared and functions specialized. Eventually, these partnerships fused into the first multicellular organisms, living bodies built not from one cell, but from many, each working in harmony. While life diversified, the atmosphere above thickened into its modern form. With rising oxygen, the sky cleared of methane haze, revealing its deep cerulean color. Sunlight reached the ocean's surface with greater clarity, fueling photosynthesis even more. Clouds formed patterns that shaped rain and climate. The planet began regulating itself, oceans absorbing heat, atmosphere distributing it, currents moving nutrients from one hemisphere to another. Earth was no longer merely a sphere of rock and water. It had become a self-sustaining system, a planetary organism where the smallest bacteria and the vastest oceans worked together in delicate equilibrium. The blue planet was awakening into maturity, preparing the stage for the next great transformation: the rise of complex life, the birth of movement, and the first creatures that would swim, crawl, and eventually walk across its surface. For nearly 2 billion years, Earth's oceans were ruled by single-celled organisms, simple in structure, yet astonishingly resilient. But as oxygen spread through the atmosphere and dissolved into the seas, a quiet revolution began unfolding in the microscopic world. Cells that once lived alone started to form alliances, merging into larger and more intricate structures. These unions were not deliberate choices, but evolutionary accidents, moments when one cell engulfed another, not as prey, but as a permanent partner. Inside these merged cells, new forms of power emerged. Some swallowed ancient bacteria that evolved into mitochondria, tiny engines capable of generating vast amounts of energy. Others incorporated photosynthetic organisms that became chloroplasts, the green powerhouses still found in plants today. With these internal symbionts, cells gained extraordinary capabilities. They grew larger, stored more energy, and built more sophisticated machinery within their boundaries. Complexity increased step by step, mutation by mutation, over immense stretches of time. What began as simple cooperation gradually became the first eukaryotic cells, the ancestors of all complex life on Earth. As these advanced cells diversified, they discovered new strategies for survival. They formed multicellular bodies, each cell taking on a specific role. Some gathered nutrients, others provided structure, others sensed light or movement. For the first time, life developed specialized tissues, coordinated growth, and the ability to shape itself into creatures with form and intention. Soon, the oceans filled with a dazzling variety of shapes, soft-bodied organisms drifting like living tapestries, tubular creatures burrowing into sediments, delicate fronds swaying with the tides. These early multicellular beings were simple compared to modern animals, yet they marked the beginning of biological architecture, a slow awakening of the planet's creative potential. Then, around 540 million years ago, something truly extraordinary occurred: the Cambrian explosion. In a geological blink, life diversified into complex designs never before seen. Creatures with eyes, limbs, shells, jaws, and nervous systems emerged almost simultaneously, filling every ecological niche with unprecedented speed. Predators evolved for the first time, driving prey to develop armor, speed, and sensory organs. The ocean became a dynamic arena of interaction, hunting, hiding, chasing, escaping a swirling dance of evolutionary innovation. With competition came intelligence. Nervous systems expanded, behavior grew more intricate, and life began to respond to its environment with increasing sophistication. Earth had entered a new era, one defined by movement, awareness, and the first stirrings of animal cognition. With the rise of complex life, the oceans transformed into interconnected ecosystems, vast webs of energy, chemistry, and evolution. Coral reefs constructed living cities beneath the waves, while trilobites crawled across the seafloor in great numbers. Worms aerated sediments, sponges filtered seawater, and early vertebrates swam through ancient seas with flexible spines that would one day support the bodies of fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The foundations for all future life, every branch of the evolutionary tree, were being laid quietly, meticulously, over millions of years. The blue planet was no longer merely alive. It was becoming conscious in fragments, tiny pulses of awareness emerging in eyes that sensed light, in nerves that detected touch, in organisms learning to move with intention. Life was beginning to feel the world, to navigate it, to explore it. And soon it would rise from the oceans entirely and claim the land and sky. As life flourished within the oceans, the world above remained silent and untouched, a vast expanse of barren rock, shifting dunes, and wind-swept plains. For billions of years, the land was lifeless, shaped only by rain, volcanic heat, and the slow grind of tectonic plates. But deep within the oceans, certain organisms were evolving abilities that would eventually allow them to escape the sea's protective embrace and transform the surface of the Earth forever. It began with simple algae drifting near shorelines, where sunlight was strongest and waves splashed nutrients onto emerging land. Some of these algae developed tougher outer walls to survive brief moments of drying. Others formed filaments capable of anchoring themselves to wet rocks. Over time, These small adaptations accumulated until the first primitive plants crept onto the margins of continents. They were humble mats of green-coating tidal flats, thin films spreading over stones, but they were the pioneers of a new era. By stabilizing soils and absorbing carbon dioxide, they altered the chemistry of both land and atmosphere, setting the stage for a global transformation. As plants gained strength, they evolved tissues capable of pulling water upward against gravity. They formed stems, leaves, and eventually roots that burrowed into the ground. With each adaptation, they pushed farther inland. Mosses and liverworts paved the way, followed by ferns, towering horsetails, and forests of giant club mosses that grew taller than any human ever would. These early forests were unlike anything alive today, dense, humid, and rich with oxygen. In fact, they produced so much oxygen that insects grew to enormous sizes, and wildfires raged across the continents with fierce intensity. The land had changed permanently. It breathed, decomposed, and cycled nutrients through a growing network of ecosystems. With plants securing the continents, the door opened for animals to follow. The first to attempt this crossing were arthropods, ancient relatives of insects and spiders who crawled from tide pools onto damp soil, searching for food among the early vegetation. Their exoskeletons kept them from drying out, making them ideal explorers of this new frontier. Soon, millipedes, scorpions, and primitive insects began populating the land, forming the earliest terrestrial food webs. They fed on decaying matter, grazed on plants, and preyed on one another in a world that was still young and fragile. But the most dramatic transition came from the oceans themselves. Certain fish living in shallow waters developed sturdy fins capable of supporting their weight for short moments on land. These fins eventually became limbs, the first arms, legs, wrists, and ankles in the history of life. Lungs evolved alongside gills, allowing these pioneers to breathe air. And slowly, step by evolutionary step, vertebrates climbed out of the water. These early amphibians were awkward travelers, their bodies designed for swimming more than walking, but their arrival on land marked one of the most significant leaps in the story of life. Once vertebrates established themselves on the continents, evolution accelerated. Some remained tied to water, returning to lay their eggs in ponds and streams. Others, however, evolved protective shells around their embryos, amniotic eggs, which freed them from the sea entirely. These were the ancestors of reptiles, birds, and eventually mammals. With this breakthrough, animals began to spread far beyond wetlands, moving into forests, mountains, and deserts. The land, once empty, now pulsed with life in all directions. The continents themselves responded to this expansion. Plants pumped oxygen into the sky, reshaping the atmosphere into a shield that filtered sunlight and stabilized temperature. Roots broke down rocks, forming soils that fed generations of organisms. Animals grazed, hunted, burrowed, and soared, carving ecological niches that would define future eras. Earth, once dominated by oceanic rhythms, had become a dual world, water and land intertwined, each influencing the other through the cycles of climate, erosion, and biological growth. The blue planet was no longer simply a sphere wrapped in oceans. It had become a living mosaic of habitats, each one evolving, expanding, and interacting. Life had stepped onto a new stage, one that would soon give rise to forests of unimaginable height, reptilian empires, and the ancient giants that would come to rule the land. As life established itself across the continents, Earth entered one of its most dynamic and vibrant eras. The land was lush with towering forests, the air rich with oxygen, and the climate warm enough for life to flourish from pole to pole. Vast wetlands stretched across the continents, and the continents themselves were drifting into new configurations, shaping oceans and coastlines that would serve as the backdrop for the rise of extraordinary creatures. This was the dawn of the reptiles, and soon the age of the dinosaurs. In the early stages of this era, reptiles diversified with remarkable speed. Some grew large, armored plates, protecting their bodies from predators. Others developed elongated limbs for running, gliding membranes for moving between trees, or sturdy shells for defense. But among these early reptiles, a particular lineage stood out: agile, upright, warm-bodied creatures that would eventually evolve into dinosaurs. They began small, moving lightly across the forest floor on powerful hind legs. But evolution favored their speed, efficiency, and adaptability, and over millions of years, they expanded into a breathtaking variety of forms. As the supercontinent Pangaea began to split apart, the climate shifted, creating new habitats, deserts, rivers, coastlines, and endless plains. These changing environments fueled evolutionary innovation, allowing dinosaurs to grow into immense sizes and occupy every ecological niche. Some became gentle herbivores with necks so long they could graze treetops others would never reach. Others became swift predators with razor-sharp teeth, keen senses, and incredible agility. Their bodies were not random designs. They were masterpieces of natural engineering, perfectly tuned to the demands of their environments. The world they inhabited was equally alive. Ferns and cycads blanketed the land. Forests of conifers towered above the plains. Insects buzzed and hummed through the air, some with wingspans larger than a human hand. Rivers overflowed with life, amphibians hiding in muddy banks, fish navigating shallow streams, early crocodilians waiting silently beneath the surface. The earth was a symphony of movement, color, and sound, a planet bursting with evolutionary possibility. Dinosaurs reached their peak during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Titanosaurs stretched nearly the length of a modern airplane. Stegosaurs displayed iconic plates along their backs, structures that may have served both defense and temperature regulation. Raptors hunted in coordinated groups, their intelligence surprising for their time. And soaring above them all were the pterosaurs, the first vertebrates to truly conquer the skies. Their wings, thin and strong, carried them across oceans and cliffs, searching for fish and nesting grounds. They were not birds yet, but they were evolution's first bold experiment in flight. Meanwhile, in the oceans, marine reptiles dominated the depths. Ichthyosaurs raced through the water like ancient dolphins, while plesiosaurs glided with elegant necks and enormous paddles. The seas were as alive as the land, filled with predators and prey engaged in an endless, ancient dance of survival. While dinosaurs ruled the continents, something subtle yet monumental was happening in the shadows. Small, fur-covered animals, early mammals, were beginning their quiet story. They were tiny, nocturnal, and vulnerable, living beneath the notice of the giants above. But they carried a different kind of potential, one rooted not in size or dominance, but in warm blood, sharp senses, and adaptable brains. Their time had not yet come, But the seeds of the future were already there, hidden beneath the feet of giants. For over 150 million years, dinosaurs shaped the Earth, dictating the flow of evolution across continents. They survived volcanic eruptions, shifting climates, and the slow drift of continents. Their reign seemed eternal, an unbroken chain of generations stretching across deep time. But the cosmos had other plans, and the event that would end their dominance and reshape the destiny of life was already moving silently through space. For more than 100 million years, the age of giants unfolded with steady confidence. Forests thrived, oceans shimmered with life, and dinosaurs dominated every corner of the continents. Nothing in their world suggested an end. Nothing in their evolution hinted at fragility. Yet extinction does not announce itself. It approaches in silence, sometimes from beneath the earth, sometimes from within the atmosphere, and sometimes from the depths of space. 66 million years ago, a massive asteroid, roughly 10 kilometers wide, wandered along a trajectory that had been set in motion long before Earth even existed. It did not seek our world. It simply followed the quiet mathematics of gravity. But in its path lay a planet teeming with life, unaware that its future was about to pivot in a single, catastrophic moment. As the asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere, the air ignited around it. The sky glowed brighter than the Sunday. Animals looked upward, sensing a danger they could not comprehend. And then impact. The force of the collision released more energy than billions of atomic bombs, vaporizing rock, boiling oceans at the point of contact, and shaking the entire crust of the planet. A crater, over 150 kilometers across, tore into the surface of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. But the true devastation came not from the explosion itself, but from what followed. Trillions of tons of molten debris were hurled into the sky, forming a global cloud of dust, ash, and vaporized minerals. As this incandescent material rained back down, wildfires erupted across continents, burning forests from horizon to horizon. Soon after, sunlight dimmed as the atmospheric veil thickened. Daylight dissolved into a cold twilight. Photosynthesis stopped. Temperatures plummeted. Food chains collapsed in slow, agonizing cascades. The age of giants ended not in a moment, but in a prolonged winter, a global silence as ecosystems died and the world struggled to breathe again. Most dinosaurs could not survive the darkness, the hunger, the chaos. Their vast bodies required abundant vegetation and prey. Their ecosystems were too interconnected, too balanced, too vulnerable to change. And so, species that had ruled Earth for millions of years vanished, leaving behind nothing but fossils and the faint chemical signatures of their existence. But not all life perished. Small creatures, warm-blooded, adaptable, opportunistic, endured the cold and scarcity. They hid in burrows, scavenged what little remained, and reproduced quickly enough to stabilize their populations. These survivors were the early mammals. Creatures that had once lived in the shadows of giants now found themselves in a world abruptly reset, a world where opportunity lay everywhere the dinosaurs had once stood. Earth, once dominated by towering reptiles, had become a quiet planet of small, resourceful beings navigating a transformed landscape. The global winter slowly lifted, forests regrew, rivers found new paths, the skies cleared, and in this renewed world, the mammals began to expand, diversify, and explore ecological roles that had been inaccessible for millions of years. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs did not end life. It redirected it. It carved the path that would eventually lead to primates, to intelligence, to consciousness, and ultimately to us. When the ash settled and the long winter loosened its grip, Earth emerged as a wounded world, scarred but alive. Forests were reduced to skeletons, coastlines reshaped by tsunamis, and entire ecosystems erased. But in the cracks of this devastation, green returned, first as delicate shoots, then as resilient shrubs, eventually as forests that reclaimed the continents in slow, patient waves. The planet was healing, and in its recovery, a new chapter of life began to unfold. The dinosaurs were gone, but the mammals, small, warm, adaptable, had endured. For more than 150 million years they had lived in the shadows, confined to the night, hiding from predators far larger than themselves. Now, suddenly, the world was open. There were empty niches everywhere. No giant herbivores to graze the plains, no apex predators to rule the forests, no winged reptiles to dominate the skies. Evolution abhors emptiness. And in the aftermath of extinction, life began to explore every possibility. Mammals diversified with astonishing speed. Some evolved into swift runners, exploring open grasslands that had never existed before the Great Extinction. Others remained in trees, developing grasping limbs, sharper vision, and more complex social behaviors. Some returned to the water, reshaping their bodies into the sleek forms that would one day become whales and dolphins. And others grew large, larger than any mammal before them, filling the ecological spaces once occupied by giant reptiles. This explosion of diversity was not random. Mammals possessed a unique set of biological advantages: warm blood that allowed activity through night and cold, complex brains capable of learning and memory, and extended parental care that strengthened social bonding. These traits, once minor benefits in a world dominated by dinosaurs, now became the engines of a new evolutionary era. Intelligence deepened, social structures grew intricate, behaviors became adaptable, flexible, creative. As mammals expanded, the continents continued their slow drift across the globe. Mountains rose, rivers shifted, climates transformed. Grasslands spread as atmospheric conditions changed, giving rise to entirely new ecosystems defined by speed, endurance, and migratory patterns. Earth, still healing from catastrophe, now pulsed with renewed energy, biodiversity blooming across land, sea, and sky. Birds, descendants of the dinosaurs, also thrived. Their feathers adapted to new climates, their beaks specialized for countless diets, their songs filled forests that had once echoed with the footsteps of giants. Insects, amphibians, reptiles, each group evolved new forms to match the emerging landscapes. The planet was not simply recovering, it was reinventing itself. Amid this flourishing tapestry, a particular lineage of small tree-dwelling mammals began to develop traits that would shape the destiny of the planet. Their eyes moved forward, giving them depth perception. Their hands became more dexterous, able to grasp branches and eventually tools. Their brains grew larger, more capable of processing the complexity of social life. These early primates were not yet remarkable, but they carried the subtle spark that would, millions of years later, ignite into full consciousness. Earth had entered the Cenozoic, the age of mammals. It was a quieter age than the one before, less defined by giants and more by intelligence, adaptability, and emotion. The world was becoming a place where memory mattered, where cooperation could determine survival, where behaviors could evolve faster than bones. The blue planet, once ruled by towering reptiles, had shifted into a new phase one in which the future would be shaped not by size, but by the rising complexity of minds. As mammals spread across the recovering continents, the world above them continued its slow metamorphosis. Mountain ranges rose as tectonic plates collided, carving new climates into the surface of the planet. Continents drifted into familiar shapes, forming the rough outlines of the world we know today. Forests expanded, shrank, and expanded again as global temperatures oscillated over millennia. Ice sheets advanced across poles and retreated. Rainforests thickened along the equator, while grasslands unfurled across the continents like green oceans of wind. Earth was no longer adjusting to catastrophe, it was refining itself, settling into the rhythms that would define the ages to come. In this shifting landscape, a small but extraordinary group of mammals began to evolve: the primates. Born in the canopies of ancient tropical forests, these early primates developed traits that set them apart from their mammalian cousins. Their hands became delicate instruments, capable of curling, gripping, manipulating. Their eyes, now positioned at the front of the skull, granted depth perception, a priceless advantage when leaping between branches or navigating dense foliage. Their brains expanded, interpreting a world full of three-dimensional challenges, social interactions, and subtle cues. Life in the trees demanded awareness, memory, strategy, and primates rose to meet this challenge with elegance. As millions of years passed, primates diversified. Some stayed high in the treetops, gliding between branches on limbs built for agility. Others descended to the forest floor, exploring new food sources. Many developed complex social structures, grooming rituals, alliances, playful communication, and the earliest sparks of empathy. Their societies began to depend on cooperation as much as on strength, and their intelligence blossomed accordingly. While these primates were refining their minds, Earth's climate shifted once more. The global temperature cooled. Forests that once blanketed continents began to recede, replaced by open woodlands and vast savannas. This transformation created challenges, but also opportunities. A lineage of primates living in Africa found themselves navigating a world with fewer trees and more open terrain. To survive, they needed to adapt. They stood upright more often, scanning the horizon for predators and food. Their hands, once devoted to climbing, became free to grasp objects, peel bark, carry fruit, or wield stones. This was the beginning of something unprecedented, a shift not just in anatomy, but in cognition. These early hominins developed greater curiosity, exploring tools in ways no other animal had. They communicated in richer patterns of sound and gesture. Their social bonds deepened, requiring larger brains to manage alliances, care for young, and remember the past. Evolution, step by delicate step, was moving toward a new form of intelligence, one capable not only of responding to the world, but of reshaping it. Meanwhile, the earth beneath their feet continued its restless journey. The Himalayas rose, altering global wind patterns. The Isthmus of Panama emerged, redirecting ocean currents and stabilizing climates across the northern hemisphere. Ice ages pulsed through the planet, cycling between cold and warmth, driving migrations, extinctions, and evolutionary leaps. Each shift placed new pressures on life, and life responded with new forms, new abilities, new ways of thinking. Throughout these vast changes, the blue planet became increasingly interconnected. Rivers carved paths across continents. Oceans exchanged heat across hemispheres. Atmospheric currents shaped patterns of rainfall, drought, monsoon, and storm. The planet itself seemed alive with motion, a dynamic stage upon which primates and eventually humans would refine their place. By the time the first recognizable ancestors of humans emerged, Earth was a world tuned for complexity. The land was rich with ecosystems that tested memory, coordination, innovation. The climate fluctuated enough to reward adaptability, and the primates that would one day call themselves human were already showing signs of a destiny far greater than their size suggested. They were creatures of curiosity, of social depth, of hands and minds working in unison, a lineage preparing slowly, invisibly for the moment when consciousness would awaken fully. As the forests of Africa continued to thin and shift into open woodlands and grasslands, the primates living within them faced a challenge unlike anything their ancestors had encountered. The stable, sheltered world of dense canopies was fading. Food sources were scattered, predators more visible, and the distances between safe havens grew wider. To survive in this changing landscape, certain primates underwent one of the most significant transformations in Earth's history. They began to walk upright. Bipedalism did not appear all at once. It emerged through countless tiny adjustments, hips shifting, spines curving, feet reshaping, muscles reorganizing to support balance and endurance. What began as a tentative advantage, seeing above tall grass, freeing the hands for gathering slowly, became a defining characteristic. Walking on two legs allowed early hominins to travel farther with less energy, to carry food or infants, to explore new environments with increased efficiency. In time, upright posture would become the foundation upon which all future human activity was built. These early hominins, such as Australopithecus, were neither apes nor humans, but something beautifully in between. Beings with minds sharp enough to navigate complex landscapes, yet bodies still reminiscent of their arboreal origins. Their hands, dexterous, precise, began to manipulate the world in new ways. Stones became tools not yet shaped with intention, but selected for usefulness. A sharp edge to cut, a heavy rock to crack a nut, a sturdy stick for defense. Each interaction taught them something about the world and about themselves. With tool use came a deeper reliance on learning. Young hominins watched their elders, imitated their movements, absorbed the subtleties of action and technique. Life was no longer dictated by instinct alone. It was guided by memory and teaching. This cultural transmission, simple at first, was the beginning of humanity's unique relationship with knowledge. What one generation discovered, the next could inherit without having to rediscover from nothing. Ideas began to persist outside the body, passed from mind to mind. At the same time, social structures grew increasingly complex. Living in groups had always been essential for primates, but for early hominins, cooperation became a matter of survival. Hunting and scavenging required coordination. Protecting one another demanded communication. Raising offspring slow developing and vulnerable required the entire group to contribute. Through these challenges, early hominins developed empathy, emotional awareness, and the ability to interpret facial expressions, gestures, and intentions. Their brains expanded not only in size but in complexity, becoming engines of social understanding. As millennia passed, some hominin species grew more robust, others more agile. Climate fluctuations tested their resilience. Droughts reshaped landscapes. Shifting food sources forced innovation. And slowly, out of this evolutionary pressure, emerged a lineage that would change the world forever: the genus Homo. These early humans, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and later species, carried with them a new kind of intelligence. One, flexible, curious, inventive. They shaped tools intentionally, rather than choosing them opportunistically. They coordinated hunts. They communicated with increasingly sophisticated vocalizations. They built shelters, explored new environments, and began to migrate beyond Africa. Their brains, now larger than those of any primate before them, could hold memories of distant places, strategies for future tasks, and emotional landscapes rich with cooperation and conflict. It was during this era that humanity stood at the threshold of a new discovery, one that would reshape evolution itself: the control of fire. Though not yet mastered in Volume 11 in Zaman Dilimi, the foundations were forming. Curiosity toward lightning fires, warmth from smoldering logs, the glow of flames in the night, all laid the psychological groundwork for a future breakthrough that would transform survival into culture. Earth, meanwhile, continued its slow transformations. Ice ages advanced and retreated, savannas expanded, rivers shifted pathways. Every climatic change nudged hominins toward greater intelligence, adaptability, and resilience. It was no longer enough merely to survive. They had to anticipate. They had to remember. They had to imagine. And in this need to imagine, to solve, to plan, to cooperate, the first true sparks of humanity began to glow within their minds. As early members of the genus Homo spread across the African landscape, they carried with them not just new anatomy or sharper tools, but something far more transformative: a growing relationship with fire. At first, flames were a mystery, terrifying, mesmerizing, unpredictable. Wildfires ignited by lightning would scorch plains and reshape forests. Early humans watched from a distance, drawn by warmth yet cautious of its power. But over countless encounters, familiarity grew. Smoldering embers left behind by storms became opportunities. Warmth on cold nights, protection from predators, a vantage point from which darkness retreated. Eventually, some groups learned not merely to use fire, but to keep it alive, nurturing glowing coals, feeding them with dry grass and branches, passing flames between camps like a treasured form of memory. Fire became more than a tool. It became a companion. Its light extended waking hours. Its heat softened food, making nutrients easier to digest. Cooked meals provided more energy, allowing brains to grow larger, bodies to grow stronger, and social bonds to deepen around shared hearths. Nighttime, once ruled by fear, became a space for communication, observation, and the earliest forms of storytelling. In the flickering glow, humanity's mind expanded inward. With fire and improved tools, Homo erectus emerged as a species of unprecedented resilience. Their bodies were built for endurance. They could walk for hours without tiring, cross savannas, climb rocky plateaus, and navigate environments that would have overwhelmed earlier primates. They hunted cooperatively, scavenged intelligently, and adapted to climates ranging from tropical forests to chilly grasslands. This versatility sparked one of the most extraordinary events in our evolutionary history, the first great migration out of Africa. Small bands of Homo erectus began to wander across continents, following herds, seeking new shelters, exploring landscapes no primate had ever seen. They crossed the Middle East into Eurasia, spread into India, Southeast Asia, and eventually reached islands separated by deep water. Their presence is marked across half the world in ancient stone tools, hand axes, perfectly shaped, symmetrical, balanced artifacts that reveal not brute survival but deliberate craftsmanship. These tools were not random. They represented thought, intention, and a standard of quality passed through generations. Wherever Homo erectus settled, they reshaped the land simply by existing. Fire cleared forests and encouraged new growth. Hunting altered populations of prey animals. Movement patterns carved pathways through plains and river valleys. For the first time, the planet began to adjust not just to climate or tectonics, but to the behavior of a single species. Social life deepened. Cooperative hunts required planning. Child rearing depended on extended care. Groups began to develop norms, unwritten rules that guided behavior, division of tasks, and conflict resolution. Around their campfires, primitive culture blossomed. Shared knowledge, shared rituals, shared identity. These weren't yet languages in the modern sense, but they were structured systems of sound, gesture, and rhythm that allowed ideas to travel from mind to mind. And as groups spread farther apart, regional variations emerged. Different climates shaped different strategies. Different resources shaped different tools. Different challenges shaped different behaviors. Humanity, still young, had begun to diversify not biologically, but culturally. Over time, Earth responded in ways both subtle and profound. Ice ages advanced, forests shrank and grew again, sea levels rose and fell. With each shift, hominins adapted, migrated, rebuilt, and reconsidered their environments. Their increasing intelligence allowed them to predict seasonal changes, plan for scarcity, and return to profitable locations year after year. They were no longer creatures bound by instinct alone. They had become thinkers of the landscape, and yet their journey was far from over. In the quiet spaces between migrations, beneath the glow of ancient embers, another lineage was beginning to take shape, a species with an even greater capacity for imagination, language, art, and symbolic thought. A species that would someday call itself human. As Homo erectus continued its long migrations across continents, new evolutionary branches began taking shape. Every landscape, every forest, desert, mountain range, and glacial valley imposed its own pressures, sculpting early humans into distinct forms. In the cold shadows of Ice Age Europe, where winds carved the land and winters stretched endlessly, one lineage rose to extraordinary strength: the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were among the most resilient beings Earth ever produced. With broad chests, powerful limbs, and dense bones, their bodies were engineered for survival in harsh climates. But they were not simply creatures of brute strength. Their minds were equally refined. Their large brains supported complex social bonds, shared hunts, and long-term memory. They crafted stone tools with remarkable skill, controlled fire with precision, and may have adorned their bodies with pigments. Evidence suggests they cared for the sick, protected the vulnerable, and perhaps even honored the dead. They were thoughtful, emotional, deeply social, fully human, in ways we are only beginning to understand. Meanwhile, far south in Africa, the shifting climate was preparing the rise of another lineage. Expanding savannas, shrinking forests, and unstable ecosystems forced primates to adapt with flexibility rather than physical power. Out of these pressures emerged a species with a new kind of mind, Homo sapiens. Early sapiens were not uniquely dominant at first, physically smaller than Neanderthals, with similar tools and similar habits, but within their brains something different was taking shape. Their thoughts were beginning to stretch beyond the present moment. They could imagine, anticipate, symbolize. In sapiens communities, communication evolved into a richer system of sounds and meanings. Ideas could be shared, remembered, revised. Knowledge no longer lived only in instinct. It lived between individuals, passed down as culture. A tool was not just an object, but a tradition. A sound was not just a signal, but a concept. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, sapiens developed the ability to think in abstractions, an evolutionary breakthrough unlike any before it. Africa's unpredictable climate continued to shape sapiens' behavior. Creativity became a survival strategy. New hunting techniques emerged, rituals formed, social networks expanded, cooperation deepened. Sapiens were learning not only to adapt to their environment, but to adapt their behavior intentionally. Across the Mediterranean and deep into Europe, the Neanderthals thrived with their own mastery of landscape. They hunted massive Ice Age mammals, survived frigid temperatures, and built shelters against the relentless cold. Their world was one of strength, endurance, and intuition, an existence honed through countless generations. For thousands of years, these two species lived apart, evolving separately, unaware that their stories were slowly drawing together. But Earth was changing. Ice sheets advanced and retreated, corridors opened and closed, and migration routes shifted. Sooner or later, their paths would meet. And when they finally did on riverbanks, in forests, near caves lit by ancient fires, the encounter did not bring the extinction of one and victory of the other. It brought exchange, cultural exchange, technological exchange, genetic exchange. Modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA to this day, a quiet reminder that our origins are not solitary but shared, interwoven with the lives of those who walked this earth before us. For a time, two intelligent human worlds coexisted on the same planet, but climate, population size, and cultural flexibility soon gave sapiens an advantage. As Ice Age conditions intensified, Neanderthal groups dwindled, not in a sudden collapse but through slow erosion, shrinking ranges, smaller family groups, fewer resources. Eventually, the last Neanderthal communities faded into silence, and Earth was left with one remaining species of human Homo sapiens, a lineage ready to reshape the destiny of the planet through memory, imagination, and meaning. Humanity had begun. As Homo sapiens expanded slowly out of Africa, their migrations were not dramatic waves, but long, winding journeys, pausing for centuries, shifting with seasons, adapting to landscapes as they moved. They followed rivers, coastlines, and herds, spreading northward through the Levant and into the ancient crossroads of Eurasia. There, in the vastness of this shared world, another type of human was already waiting: the Neanderthals. We do not know where the first meeting took place. It may have been along a riverbank at dawn, or in the shadow of a limestone cliff, or at the edge of a forest where two hunting parties paused at the same watering hole. But what is clear is that the encounter was not defined solely by conflict. It was far more complex: two intelligent human species looking into faces strangely familiar, recognizing strength, curiosity, and intention reflected back at them. The evidence left behind tells a quiet but powerful story. They interacted, they exchanged tools and techniques, they shared space, and they mixed. Genetic traces of Neanderthals live on in modern humans, shaping our immune systems, our skin, even subtle aspects of our biology. This inheritance is not a trophy of conquest. It is a signature of connection, of coexistence between two worlds that once walked the earth together. Yet, even with this exchange, Homo sapiens carried an advantage that became increasingly important: cognitive flexibility. Their minds could shift rapidly between ideas, innovate tools in new ways, adapt to unpredictable climates, and form large, interconnected social networks. Where Neanderthals excelled in strength and environmental mastery, sapiens excelled in communication, collaboration, and imagination. This shift is most visible in the rise of symbolism. Sapiens began creating images not merely to decorate, but to remember, to ritualize, to express. On cave walls across Africa and Europe, they painted animals in sweeping strokes, outlined hands in red and black pigments, and carved abstract shapes that still elude interpretation. These artworks were more than pictures; they were the birth of shared meaning. They allowed ideas to persist beyond a single mind, beyond a single moment. Around the same time, sapiens developed more intricate tools: bone needles, composite weapons, finely carved blades, and ornaments worn on the body. These objects suggest identity, status, and a sense of self that extended into the symbolic realm. Community bonds strengthened, stories began forming around campfires, rituals evolved, weaving individuals into groups with shared purpose and memory. Meanwhile, the climate was shifting again. Glaciers advanced across Europe, forests thinned, giving way to freezing steppes. Food became scarce. For Neanderthal populations smaller in number, more isolated, these changes hit hard. Their groups struggled to maintain stable population sizes. Their territories shrank as sapiens expanded into new regions with greater adaptability, larger social webs, and a more flexible approach to innovation. There was no great battle, no sudden disappearance. The Neanderthals faded gradually, an erosion rather than an extinction event. Generation by generation, they dwindled until the last survivors vanished from the archaeological record, leaving behind only footprints, tools, and their genetic echo within us. And so, for the first time in Earth's long history, only one human species remained. Yet this was not an end, this was a beginning. With the departure of their ancient cousins, Homo sapiens inherited the entire planet, its landscapes, its dangers, its possibilities. And in the millennia ahead, they would spread to every corner of the world, transforming not only their environments, but the very meaning of existence through art, memory, culture, and imagination. Humanity's true story was about to unfold. With Neanderthals gone and Homo sapiens standing as the last surviving human lineage, A new era began, an era defined not by domination, but by exploration. For tens of thousands of years, humanity remained a species of travelers, hunter-gatherers who moved with the seasons, followed the migrations of animals, and learned to read the landscapes around them with astonishing precision. They did not yet settle in one place, but they knew the world intimately, its winds, its rivers, its plants, its hidden dangers. These early societies lived lightly on the earth, but their minds were becoming heavier with meaning. Around their fires, they shared stories that explained storms, stars, death, and birth. They began to see patterns in the world, cycles of the moon, the return of animals, the blooming of plants, and these observations seeded the beginnings of spirituality. The universe became something they could speak to, something they could honor. Rituals emerged, dances, burials, offerings, markings of time and change. The human mind was no longer merely surviving, it was interpreting. The tools they created grew more refined. Spears became lighter and stronger. Flint blades were shaped with delicate precision. Bows and arrows emerged, extending human reach and changing the dynamics of the hunt. Sewing needles made from bone allowed clothes to be fitted to the body, protecting people from harsh climates. Shelters grew more complex, tents of hide, huts of wood and clay, structures adapted to every environment, from tropical shores to frozen tundra. Despite their nomadic lifestyle, these early humans were not isolated. Groups met, traded, intermarried, and exchanged knowledge across long distances. Seashells from beaches ended up in mountain caves. Obsidian from volcanic regions appeared hundreds of miles away. Ideas traveled just as far: songs, myths, techniques for lighting fire or shaping tools. Humanity was forming the first webs of culture, long before cities or nations would exist. Art flourished during this time. Cave walls became canvases for visions that blended memory, imagination, and belief. Animals were painted in motion. Human figures appeared with masks, horns, or abstracted limbs. Hand stencils, simple yet profound, became signatures left across continents, declarations of presence in a world still vast and wild. Sculptures from bone, stone, and ivory emerged, some as symbols of fertility, others as guardians or emblems of identity. These creations show a mind capable of abstraction, symbolism, and beauty, a mind deeply aware of itself. Human relationships grew increasingly complex. Cooperation became essential, hunting in teams, sharing resources, raising children collectively. Social bonds strengthened through rituals and shared stories. Over generations, this created stability in a world that was otherwise unpredictable. People did not merely survive together, they remembered together. They held the past as something valuable: lessons, warnings, celebrations, identities. Memory became a collective structure as powerful as any physical tool. As humans spread farther across Earth, they encountered drastically new environments. They adapted to deserts, jungles, mountains, islands, and frozen plains. They crossed land bridges into new continents, eventually reaching Australia, Siberia, and the Americas. Each migration was a monumental achievement of navigation, endurance, and communal effort. With every step into new territory, humans learned to transform challenges into opportunities, changing hunting strategies, inventing new garments, altering social structures. Slowly, Quietly, without realizing the magnitude of their actions, these early humans began to alter ecosystems. Fire was used to clear underbrush. Animal populations shifted as hunting patterns changed. Plants spread or disappeared based on human movement. Humanity was becoming a force of nature, a species whose decisions held the power to shape landscapes. But the greatest transformation was still ahead. In a few thousand years, humans would make a leap that would forever reshape their relationship with the earth. They would learn to cultivate the land. The world of the hunter-gatherer, rich with movement, myth, and ancient freedom, was nearing its final chapters. For countless generations, humanity lived in rhythm, with the seasons moving with the great herds, gathering wild plants and navigating the world with a deep knowledge of its patterns. But as the last ice age began to recede, Earth's climate shifted into a warmer, more stable phase. Glaciers melted, rivers expanded, and fertile valleys emerged across continents. This new stability created an unintentional invitation for change, a transformation that would alter not just how humans lived, but what humans were. In regions like the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, and the Nile Valley, wild grains and edible plants grew in abundance. Hunter-gatherers learned how these plants behaved, when they sprouted, where they thrived, how they reseeded. Over time, people began collecting not just for immediate survival, but for future seasons, saving seeds, storing grains, preparing for unpredictable weather. A quiet shift occurred. Humans were no longer simply following food. They were beginning to manage it. The first intentional cultivation was modest, clearing small patches of land, scattering seeds, protecting young shoots from animals. But the results were astonishing. Plants that had once been sparse became abundant. Harvests grew larger, steadier, more reliable. The rhythm of life changed. Instead of wandering across vast territories, humans began returning to the same places year after year, tied to cycles of planting and harvest. This was not yet full settlement, but the seed of it an attachment to place that would grow as steadily as the crops themselves. As plant cultivation expanded, humans unwittingly began shaping evolution. The grains they harvested were those with the largest seeds, the easiest husks, the most reliable growth. Over generations, these traits intensified. Wheat, barley, rice, maize plants, transformed by human hands into species that depended on us as much as we depended on them. Domestication had begun, and with it, a new relationship between humanity and the natural world. Animals soon followed. Wolves that lingered near human camps, drawn by bone scraps and firelight, grew comfortable with human presence. The gentlest among them survived and reproduced, eventually becoming the first domesticated dogs, partners in hunting, guardians of camps, companions in the dark. Later, humans began taming goats, sheep, cattle, pigs, creatures that provided meat, milk, hides, and labor. Each domesticated species brought new stability, new possibilities, new responsibilities. With reliable food came population growth. Groups that once numbered in the dozens grew to hundreds. Camps that were temporary became semi-permanent. Over time, they transformed into the first villages, clusters of huts arranged around central hearths, with pathways worn into the earth by generations of footsteps. People built storage pits, granaries, communal spaces. Life gained structure, rhythm, predictability. This settling down changed everything. Birth rates increased, lifespans lengthened, tools grew more specialized, social roles diversified. Some individuals farmed, others crafted, others managed food stores or cared for children. The first hints of inequality emerged as wealth became measurable. Grain, livestock, land, culture deepened. Rituals tied to harvests, symbols carved on clay tablets, early calendars etched into bone. The night sky, once a backdrop for nomads, became a clock for farmers. Stars were no longer spirits alone. They were markers of planting seasons, guides for predicting floods and droughts. Knowledge began to accumulate, not only in stories but in observation, calculation, and record-keeping. Humanity's mind was shifting from mythic to analytical, from wandering intuition to settled contemplation. But even as villages grew, this new lifestyle carried its own risks. Dense populations meant disease could spread. Dependence on crops meant vulnerability to droughts. Conflicts over land began to emerge. Human life had become more abundant, but also more fragile in new and unfamiliar ways. Yet the momentum of this transformation was unstoppable. Agriculture had changed the human species at its roots, its biology, its society, its psychology. Food was no longer something to find, it was something to create. And in creating it, humans had stepped onto a new evolutionary path. One that would lead to cities, civilizations, empires, and the complex world we know today. The first settlements were small, but in their quiet walls of mud and stone, the blueprint of humanity's future was already forming. As agriculture tightened its hold on human life, villages that had once been small clusters of huts began to grow. Families expanded, harvests increased, and the spaces between dwellings filled with granaries, workshops, and communal hearths. Over time, some settlements grew so large that they took on a new identity, no longer simple villages, but the earliest forms of cities. Here, the human story entered a new phase, one defined not by survival alone, but by organization, innovation, and the emergence of shared identity on an unprecedented scale. The first cities were born in fertile river valleys: Mesopotamia, the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow River. These landscapes provided not just food, but the conditions for sustained population growth. Irrigation systems stretched across fields, channeling water with deliberate precision. Walls rose around settlements to protect them from floods, predators, and rival groups. Temples and gathering spaces stood at their centers, symbols of shared belief and the rising complexity of social life. Humanity had shifted from a species scattered across the wilderness to one concentrated in powerful hubs of activity. As cities expanded, societies became increasingly specialized. No longer did every individual farm, hunt, or gather. Some individuals became potters, crafting vessels to store grain and water. Others became weavers, transforming plant fibers into cloth. Smiths shaped metal. Builders shaped stone and clay. Leaders emerged, individuals responsible for organizing labor, resolving disputes, directing communal projects. With specialization came hierarchy, and with hierarchy came new forms of power. Yet the most profound invention of this era was something intangible: writing. What began as simple marks on clay symbols for grain, animals, trade goods, slowly evolved into systems capable of recording laws, stories, prayers, and the movement of stars. Writing freed knowledge from the limits of memory. Ideas could outlive their creators. Decisions could be preserved. History could begin. With writing, humanity stepped into a new domain of thought: calculation, planning, astronomy, mathematics. These practices expanded not from instinct, but from deliberate study. People learned to track the flood cycles of rivers, predict the movements of constellations, calculate harvest yields, and record transactions that bound entire economies together. The world became not only a place to inhabit, but a system to understand. Cities grew ever larger. Walls stretched outward. Marketplaces bustled. Workshops hummed with activity. Temples soared, their stones arranged with astonishing precision. Humanity's relationship with the planet shifted once more. Rivers were redirected, forests cleared, hills carved into terraces. Humans were no longer mere inhabitants of Earth, they were its architects. But with growth came tension. Crowded living brought disease. Competition for land and resources led to conflicts between settlements. Hierarchies deepened, and social stratification took shape. Inequality became woven into the structure of civilization. Yet even amid these challenges, creativity flourished. Music, sculpture, pottery, monumental architecture, each arose from the concentrated energy of thousands of people living, working, and imagining together. Trade networks stretched across continents. Obsidian from distant volcanoes, lapis lazuli from mountains, spices from forests and deserts. Goods traveled farther than any individual might journey in a lifetime. Cultures blended, exchanged tools, technologies, rituals, and ideas. Humanity, once bound by geography, began to connect through shared symbols and shared knowledge. In the great cities that emerged, something remarkable happened. Society began to think of itself as a collective. Laws were crafted, identities formed, stories written that linked people to ancestors, gods, and the cosmos. These stories guided behavior, united groups, and shaped the dawn of civilizations that would rise and fall for millennia. By this point, humans had become the most influential species on the planet, not because of strength or speed, but because of cooperation, imagination, and the ability to build structures material, social, and symbolic that extended far beyond any one lifetime. The blue planet, once shaped only by ice, rivers, and tectonic drift, was now shaped by human thought, and the age of civilization had only just begun. As the first cities matured into complex societies, humanity entered an era defined by ambition on a scale never before seen. Villages had grown into towns, towns into cities, and cities into vast civilizations whose influence spread far beyond their walls. Communications, trade routes, and alliances stitched continents together in intricate patterns of power and exchange. Humanity, once wandering in small bands across wild landscapes, had become a species that could reshape the destiny of entire regions. The rise of empires was not merely a political shift, it was a cognitive one. To manage thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions of people required organization, memory, foresight, and law. Writing evolved into bureaucratic systems. Records tracked harvests, labor, armies, taxes. Vast archives emerged, rooms filled with clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, bamboo strips, each one a container of human thought. For the first time, knowledge could accumulate across generations, preserved not by memory alone but by script. As cities grew, so did the curiosity of their citizens. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica, everywhere that humans gathered in great numbers, questions arose. Why do rivers flood? What shapes the stars? What causes illness? How does the world work? These questions sparked the birth of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and early engineering. Human beings began measuring shadows to predict seasons, carving canals to redirect rivers, studying the movement of celestial bodies to create calendars woven with astonishing precision. Farming villages had required practical knowledge, but civilizations demanded abstract thought, and from this abstraction emerged philosophy, the attempt not merely to survive, but to understand existence itself. In ancient Greece, India, China, Persia, and the Middle East, thinkers pondered the nature of the soul, the structure of reality, the ethics of society, the logic of reason. They sought patterns in chaos and meaning in suffering. They attempted to grasp the invisible forces that shaped the visible world. Often, these ideas traveled farther than armies ever could. They moved through trade routes, passed from teacher to student, from scroll to scroll, from shrine to marketplace. Belief systems took root, religions, mythologies, cosmologies, each one offering a lens through which humans could see themselves as part of something larger. These shared beliefs united vast populations, inspiring temples, rituals, and moral codes that shaped daily life. Meanwhile, technological innovation accelerated. Bronze tools evolved into iron blades, wooden wheels turned into chariots, then wagons, then complex machinery. Ships expanded trade across seas. Roads connected far-off regions. Infrastructure grew: aqueducts, granaries, bridges, observatories. Humanity was moving from survival to mastery, mastery of environment, mastery of resources, mastery of knowledge. Empires rose, each building upon the achievements of those before them. The Egyptians harnessed the Nile's rhythm to sustain monumental architecture. The Mesopotamians developed cuneiform and advanced mathematics. The Chinese engineered vast irrigation networks and early compasses. The Greeks refined philosophy and geometry. The Romans built cities of stone that still stand today. Yet these empires carried shadows alongside their brilliance. Social hierarchy deepened, inequality widened, and conflicts became more devastating. Power, once shared among small communities, now concentrated in the hands of kings, priests, and elites. Conquests reshaped borders, displaced populations, and altered the course of cultures. Humanity had unlocked unimaginable potential, but also unleashed unprecedented tension. Still, even within these tensions, one thing remained constant: the expansion of the human mind. We learned not only to adapt to the world, but to imagine worlds that had never existed. We projected stories onto stars, carved histories into stone, and built institutions that could preserve wisdom across centuries. No other species had ever done this, not because they lacked intelligence, but because the human mind possessed something unique: the ability to create meaning collectively. By the end of this era, the world was no longer a collection of isolated landscapes. It was a network of civilizations, each shaping the other through trade, war, migration, and shared curiosity. Humanity had become planetary in scale, its actions rippling across continents and generations. The blue planet, once molded only by geological and biological forces, was now shaped by culture, knowledge, and ambition. And yet, the greatest transformations were still to come. For millennia, civilizations rose and fell, each contributing ideas, tools, and stories that slowly accumulated across continents. But for all their brilliance, much of human understanding remained bound to myth, tradition, and limited observation. People mapped the stars yet misunderstood their nature, treated illness with ritual yet lacked knowledge of anatomy, and built monuments of stone without grasping the physical laws that governed their construction. Humanity was advancing, but the world was still wrapped in mystery. Then, in a relatively short span of history, something extraordinary happened. Curiosity sharpened into method, observation became system, and the human quest for understanding ignited a revolution of thought, the scientific revolution. It began quietly, with individuals who dared to question accepted truths. They studied falling objects, charted planetary movements, dissected plants and animals, ground lenses to peer into the microcosm. With every discovery, the universe became less mythical and more measurable, predictable, knowable. Astronomers realized that Earth was not the center of creation, but a single world orbiting a star among countless others. Mathematicians developed new languages to describe motion, force, and change. Physicians began to see the body not as a vessel for spirits, but as a complex system governed by anatomy and physiology. The invention of the printing press accelerated everything. Ideas spread faster than ever before, crossing borders, languages, and cultures with unprecedented speed. Science transformed not only knowledge but daily life. Tools became machines. Machines became engines. Engines reshaped the world. This shift, first gradual, then explosive, ushered in the Industrial Revolution, a turning point in the history of the planet. Steam-powered factories, iron rails stitched continents together. Ships crossed oceans in days instead of months. Human muscle was no longer the primary force of production. Energy, drawn from coal and later oil, fueled industry with relentless momentum. Cities swelled with people migrating from countryside to factory. Night was conquered by artificial light. Communication leapt across distances with telegraphs and later telephones. A planet, once paced by the rhythm of seasons, now ticked to the pulse of machines. Humanity had stepped into a new world, one defined by speed, electricity, chemistry, and engineering. This transformation changed not only society, but the Earth itself. The atmosphere began to shift as smoke from factories drifted skyward. Rivers were diverted, forests cleared, mines carved deep into the crust. For the first time in the planet's 4-billion-year history, a single species was becoming a geological force. Earth's ecosystems, once regulated solely by climate and evolution, now bent under human influence. Population surged. Medical advances reduced mortality, agriculture intensified, and global trade provided resources to billions. The human footprint expanded across every continent, from frozen tundra to tropical rainforest. And with this expansion came a new kind of interdependence, nations linked by commerce, culture, conflict, and cooperation. Yet, amid these vast changes, the human mind underwent another profound shift. Philosophy merged with science. Questions once answered by myth were now explored through evidence, logic, and experiment. People began to see themselves not as subjects of fate, but as agents capable of shaping the future. This newfound agency brought both promise and peril. Technologies emerged that could heal illness, extend life, and feed millions, yet also weapons capable of devastation on an unimaginable scale. The pace of progress accelerated further with electricity, automobiles, aviation, radio, and computing. Every invention amplified the next. Knowledge grew exponentially, reaching into the atom, into space, into the code of life itself. Humanity was no longer merely adapting to the world, it was redesigning it. By the dawn of the modern era, Earth had become a hybrid planet, half natural, half engineered. Its atmosphere reflected human industry. Its landscapes reflected human ambition. Its future increasingly depended on human choices. The blue planet, shaped over billions of years by physics, chemistry, and biology, was now shaped equally by thought, technology, and intention. Humanity had become a planetary force, one capable of reaching the stars, but also one responsible for the world it had transformed. From the first trembling molecules drifting in ancient oceans, to the rise of forests, giants, fire, cities, science, and dreams. The story of Earth has been a story of transformation, not sudden, not violent, but patient, an unfolding across billions of years, guided by chance, pressure, and the quiet persistence of life. And now, you are here, a single human being, alive in this moment, carrying inside your body and mind the entire history of the planet. Every atom in you was forged in the heart of a star. Every cell traces its lineage to the first spark of life in primordial seas. Your bones remember the movements of ancient fish. Your lungs echo forests that once breathed for the world. Your thoughts emerge from neural circuits shaped by millions of years of evolution, migrations, trials, questions, and triumphs. You are not separate from Earth's story, you are its continuation. The blue planet has changed in countless ways, yet across all this time, one thing has remained constant: its ability to create, to shape, to adapt, to survive. Earth is a world that rebuilds itself again and again, and humanity is now part of that rebuilding. One voice in a planetary chorus that began long before us and will continue long after. Look at where the story has led, from firelight to starlight, from stone tools to space telescopes, from whispered myths to scientific understanding, from wandering across savannas to exploring other worlds. Humanity has become a species capable of reflection, able not only to exist, but to understand existence itself. You can look back across time and see the entire chain that brought you here. You can look forward into the unknown and imagine futures that have not yet been born. This ability to remember and to imagine is the latest chapter of Earth's long evolutionary journey. And although the world faces challenges, as it always has, remember this: life persists, Earth persists. Transformation is the nature of this planet, and transformation is the inheritance of every being who calls it home. As you close your eyes, let this truth settle gently within you. You belong to a universe that has been unfolding for billions of years. You are part of a planet that has survived ice and fire, darkness and dawn. And your heartbeat in this quiet moment is the echo of a story far older than any memory yet carried effortlessly within you. The blue planet turns beneath the same stars that watched life's first breath. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, you are resting inside a world that has been shaping itself toward this moment for a very, very long time. Sleep now in the arms of a planet that remembers everything.